Welcome back to Red Cedar Radar. I'm joined by our usual guest, Paul. Today, we are going to be recapping Michigan State's games against Wisconsin and Michigan and kind of look ahead at the rest of the basketball season going forward, Big Ten play, and kind of what the odds are looking like heading into March. How are you today, Paul?
I'm doing well. It's always good to celebrate the birthday of your head coach and 700 wins with several thousand of your close friends, which I got to do
Right.
last night. So
Yeah.
I'm
I bet
doing
the
pretty well.
I bet the Breslin was rocking.
It
I'm
was.
jealous a little bit that I wasn't there, but that's okay. Um, let's just start with that. Any notable moments of some of those like happenings after the game, celebrating Izzo's birthday and then his 700 win? Anything that you noticed that you want to share, just like from a fan perspective of getting to be in the house when all of that was happening?
It was definitely a lot of fun. I would say it was a very loud environment, and of course, it's usually quite loud in Breslin. But they definitely, I think, were amped up a little bit more than usual. And there was definitely some shenanigans here or there. I know Brendan had reported as a part of the Spartans Illustrated team that there were some confetti thrown at the Michigan bench, and there was some complaining about that. And I think the Izzo also sang "Happy Birthday" to Tom Izzo at the beginning, during the pregame. So that was nice. And then after it was really pretty cool because you could see from where we were sitting, you could see Tom Izzo being interviewed, I believe, by the NBC Sports or Peacock staff. And of course, that was televised, so I didn't see that live. But you could see the players in the background kind of dancing around with those little 700 signs. And so that was really cool to see, and just to see them kind of dancing around and everything. They clearly were very happy. And it was, clearly it was something that meant a lot to the players. Because even after the game, AJ Hogard was quoted as saying that, and I should look up the exact quote, but it was like, there was no way that we were going to lose that game. Like, truth be told, or to be honest, I think there's no way it was going to happen. We weren't going to allow that. So and they definitely played that way in the second half. First half, maybe not so much, but yeah, overall it was a great event. I learned that the student section does get very passionate about chicken nuggets if a team is to miss a free throw. I know that's a fairly new little contest that apparently you get chicken nuggets for missed free throws, and I've never heard a crowd so loud for a second, the second free throw of like a 1-and-1, or I guess it wouldn't have been a 1-and-1 of a two shot foul. So I thought, certain members of the media have criticized that promotion, but it was a good time. It got people excited. So what's wrong with it? I don't know.
Yeah.
But overall, it was definitely a fun night at the Breslin Center last night, but it was a late night.
Yeah, definitely. Real late game. I always wonder how that stuff gets decided, and obviously there was games going on before ours on Peacock, so that is why, but it just makes for a long night.
It does.
At
You think they
least
put
the
the
second half, I didn't have to be sitting on the edge of my seat too much, hoping that we would pull out the win at the end. I was kind of relaxed because if I was, amped up, I wouldn't have been able to go to sleep right away. So they did that for all of us. It was their gift to us,
yeah,
Don't keep it too close at the end, but you know.
absolutely. Oh, and one thing from personal experience that does help you is that if you have to stay up till midnight and then drive an hour in the fog after the game, that
Yeah.
definitely, you're pretty tired after that. So it wasn't too bad
Yeah,
getting
I
back
imagine.
after that.
Yeah. Yeah. Something I was going to say when you were bringing up the chicken nuggets. I've gone to a couple of away games now, football and basketball, covered a few places, and it's so interesting to see all the different promotions that different places have for restaurants and things that are around. I want to say Indiana had something to do with pretzels because there's like famous pretzels there, and then I don't know that Wisconsin had a cheese curd promo, but they sold cheese curds inside the Kohl Center, which I thought was very cool. Um, just interesting stuff like that. Every place has something along the lines of the chicken nugget thing that MSU does, but I always think it's kind of fun to see the different things that places do.
Yeah. Now, did you try the cheese curds at the Kohl Center, Sydney?
I have to be honest with you, I had already eaten a bag of cheese curds before, and I did not want to be doubly full of cheese curds, so I avoided that at the Kohl Center. And I'm imagining that they were like very extra expensive because everything is at arenas, so I sat that one out. But I did see them on the menu at the
Oh,
concession stand. So
I am only slightly disappointed, but you can only do so much when it comes to cheese curds.
Right, right. I didn't want to overdo it. Okay,
But
so
that's all
let's
well.
let's get into talking about Wisconsin. Um, the Spartans left with a loss, 81-66. Izzo's comments after the game kept it pretty brief, but he said, his biggest disappointment was that Michigan State wasn't winning in effort related things. Um, he did say after the game that he didn't know this pregame, but Madi Sissoko, there was a death in his family. His grandmother had passed away, and he did not let Izzo know that before the game. And I think Izzo said something along the lines of, he's just off tonight. He's not playing like himself. And because of that happened, and the recent loss of his father as well, Izzo kind of said that's making more sense with how he played in that game. Um, Rebounding, the Spartans just didn't really have the same kind of, tenacity that I hope that they, normally do, or sometimes that they do. 22 rebounds overall, only 5 offensive rebounds and 17 defensive rebounds. I was feeling the same way, and I'm glad that Izzo kind of brought up that effort. Watching the game at the Kohl Center, it was just like they never fully showed up. Obviously, Wisconsin was playing very well, and they have been playing very well. So, that's a factor. And they're, playing on the road in the Big Ten is also a factor. But I just felt like the Michigan State players or our guys just didn't want it as much as the Wisconsin guys did. Um, any takeaways from you, Paul?
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of the main points. Is I was watching the game, I mean, and I was trying to go through some of the stats, and you mentioned some of the important ones. And honestly, if you just look at like the four factors, which is one of the stats that I like to look at, essentially nothing really went right at all for MSU. So as you mentioned, the rebounding has been a problem for most of the season. This is, Michigan State is a program that's founded itself on rebounding. That's how Izzo made his name back in the late 90s. And it's just, something that is a core principle to the program. And this is honestly one of Izzo's worst rebounding teams all the way around. Which is confusing because they should be better than they are because they're very athletic. They do have some size. And so, as you mentioned, it seems somewhat effort related, and that's hard to swallow because that should just not happen. And so that is disappointing. But against Wisconsin, they gave up 40% of Wisconsin's missed shots. Wisconsin rebounded, and so unless you're going to do the same thing on the other end, which they didn't, they were below average on for offensive rebounding. That puts you in a major hole. It just you give the opponents more shots. Now, one way that Michigan State has been able to combat that relative weakness in rebounding is that this Michigan State team has been really very good with turnovers. They've taken excellent care of the ball. Actually, this is on pace to be Izzo's best team when it comes to turnovers, as far as not committing any. And generally, MSU is this year has been very good at creating steals and generating turnovers. So that's been able to kind of offset that problem on the rebounding side, more or less. But against Wisconsin, the turnovers were pretty much even, and MSU just got killed on the boards. So they lost a lot of shots that way. And then just as far as raw shooting, MSU just didn't have a good shooting night. And Wisconsin, frankly, was on fire. I mean, their effective field goal percentage was close to 60%. And Wisconsin, they don't usually shoot that well. And the thing that's frustrating is I feel like both games, both at Breslin and at the Kohl Center for MSU versus Wisconsin, kind of played out the same way. Like MSU didn't shoot that well. Wisconsin shot very well. And if you can't rebound, you're not winning the turnover battle, you're not out shooting them, it's really, really hard to win, especially when MSU is also not getting to the free throw line. Like they've been very poor in that area also. And so again, if you lose like all the stats, then you're going to lose. There's just no way you can win. So if you get fewer shots and you make less of them, you don't have to be that good at math to figure out that that's not a winning formula. So
Yeah.
yeah, it just seemed like pretty much everything went wrong that could have gone wrong against Wisconsin. And sometimes if you're going on the road against a team that's right now projected as a 2 seed, whether they'll wind up there or not, I don't know. They're ranked in the top 15. So at the end of the day, you lose a road game to a top 15-ish team, top 10-ish team. It's not the end of the world.
Right.
But the response, I think, from some of the fan base, and that's because we've accumulated too many losses earlier in the season, has been a little bit disproportionate. Because I mean, like, yeah, you lost to the Kohl Center. So what? It's one of the toughest. It's probably the second toughest game in the schedule. So it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
But it didn't. It wasn't a competitive game, and that was probably more of the problem.
Right. Right. Yeah, something that I found to be really telling after the game is that Malik Hall was asked a question about how both Wisconsin and Michigan State have returned quite a few of their players this year. Roster looks very similar, with a few additions, of course, but like roster looks very similar to how it looked before. So a lot of veteran players. And the question was, why has Wisconsin been able to put things together and have such a great season with a returning roster? And what has gone wrong for Michigan State? Why have they not been able to do the same thing? Which is what was expected at the beginning of the season, with their high ranking and all the buzz around the team. He kind of didn't really have an answer and said, that's a good question. I've never thought about that. I didn't realize, and I found his lack of answer to be also just like very fitting to the situation as well. It was a really good question. I can't remember now who asked it. I should go back in the audio that I have, but I just thought him saying, "Oh, we haven't really thought about that," just kind of put it into perspective with where this team maybe is at, like, and I don't know, like, I'm trying to think, like, not environment wise, but like team camaraderie and like things that they've thought about outside of the box of basketball. And I just, you know, it piqued my interest. And I'm stumbling over my words because I don't really know exactly what to say because I'm not sure that it means too much. But I just felt like it was like, oh, we lost this game because of effort related things. And then you're not really sure how to answer this question that kind of it was very telling. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and frankly, it's not overly surprising. And one of the things we were discussing last night at the game was some of these intangibles related to personality and how they might be impacting the overall season.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was true last night at the Michigan game is Izzo brought back, or I don't know if he brought them back, but there were several former players that were there, including, Mateen Cleaves and I think Charlie Bell and Pig Miller, who played in the early '90s, if I remember correctly, Steve Smith. And you just think about this kind of long line of Izzo players that sort of had this certain brand of toughness. Somebody like Draymond Green is a more recent example that's very obvious. And even somebody like Cassius or Xavier Tillman had a certain kind of cachet to them. And I think this team, it's a very talented group of guys, but it's kind of hard to figure out who the sort of alpha dog might be on the team, so to speak. And there's several candidates. AJ Hoggard has definitely got some dog in him, I would say, and he shows it sometimes. I think we've seen it more this year than say last year, but sometimes he just kind of fogs out a bit.
Yeah.
And then you have Tyson Walker, who Tyson's an interesting kid because I know you've probably interviewed him or talked to him. He's very soft spoken. He can be very almost shy, but you can sort of see that, like, and I think I've mentioned this before, like deep down, like, as I said, he's a stone cold killer. And if he gets in that certain mentality, I think that he could certainly at least lead by example, but I wouldn't peg him to be a very vocal leader, which, and a team needs that. And I'm a little concerned with Tyson's shot lately. It seems like his shooting percentage has dipped a bit, and he was 0 for 6 last night against Michigan, including some of the widest open threes I have ever seen in my life that he just couldn't make. So, that concerns you a little bit. And then, Akins also doesn't seem like the most vocal player either. And then you got Malik Hall, who I love Malik Hall. I really do. I think he's one of my favorite players. He seems like a really nice kid. But again, he's not a vocal leader. It's just not his personality.
Yeah.
And so we kind of ran through the 4 best players on the team and the upperclassmen. And, and of course there's Mady Sissoko, who I think is a fiery, passionate guy. But, he grew up in a different continent, which, that matters. Like, I think, he's a great kid, but I don't think you can expect him to be the vocal leader. Like, it just doesn't really make sense. And that's the upperclassmen. And I mean, they say Jeremy Fears might have it, but he's a freshman and he's hurt.
Right.
Trey Holloman might have some of those qualities, but I think they're lacking that guy that sort of, when they're playing bad, grabs him by the collar and says, "Enough is enough."
Right.
Now, the interesting thing is there was some scuttlebutt in the locker room last night that a surprise candidate may have emerged, and I know Brendan wrote about this in his article that was posted earlier today. That they did have a surprise speaker that came forward and basically called them out and said, "You guys we're playing soft, and this is not Spartan basketball, and this is not acceptable." And that was Davis Smith, the walk-on senior son of Steve Smith, a legendary Spartan from the early '90s.
Yeah.
And Hogard was basically talking. I was talking to Hogard when I heard about this, and I think Hall was relating the story as well. And so I saw some quotes from both players. And Hogard was kind of like surprised. He's like, "Yeah, he's a leader." He actually almost misspoke. He's like, "He's our leader," and then he's like, "No, he's a leader," which I thought was interesting in itself. Like, is that a Freudian slip or not? I don't know. But he definitely, apparently Smith is like, "No, this is not acceptable. This is not Spartan basketball." And like, his dad stood up in
Right.
he's got the street cred as far as that goes. So there's a good and a bad side to that story. Like, it's good that somebody stood up, but like it shouldn't have to be a walk on.
Yeah.
So if we're looking for intangibles, then that may be what it is, and that might not get better. That's the thing that's concerning, is that may
Well,
not get better.
yeah, you're right. And sometimes I think at this point in the season, if it was going to get better, maybe it already would have. There's a lot left, and I don't want to think like that yet, but it just seems like they've had a lot of time to figure it out and it hasn't happened yet. Maybe it'll click. I don't know. Of the guys that you mentioned, and I've talked about this before, but I want it so badly to be AJ Hogard. Like, he
Yeah,
has those qualities. He has everything that would make him the best person to be the leader of the team, but he just struggles with that. And like I've said before, I don't really know what it is, but
yeah.
I want it to be him so bad. And I think sometimes he wants it to be him, but he
Hmm.
maybe just doesn't always want it to be him. And my
Yeah.
runner up off that list that you said was, I have been loving how Trey Hellman has been playing.
Yes.
He looks, number one, he looks like he just wants to be there so bad, which some of the other guys, I sometimes scratch my head and wonder if they truly want to be there or not,
Hmm.
with those effort related things that Izzo was talking about. And I just think he's bringing a lot of energy. There's some growing pains as he's, still a younger player on the team, but I just think maybe next year, maybe the year after, I don't know, he could fill that role. I'm seeing lots of good things from him. I've been very, very excited and pleased with his play recently. And it seems like Izzo has too, because he's kind of given him a little bit more of a leash to shoot and kind of be more independent on the court. At least that's what it seems like. So maybe an eye on that for the future of Spartan basketball. But for now, I'm going to write AJ Hogard a letter and say, please do it because you can do it. But I just don't know. There's something there that hasn't quite been worked out yet, and I don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah. You just kind of wonder as the season kind of plays out and we get closer to the end. And I think technically AJ could come back for a COVID year, although COVID years I think this is the last time that would be an option if I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing the math right. I think most people expect that he won't be back either way.
Yeah.
But as you get to that end of the career, the end of one's career, will that be the spark that, like, there is literally no tomorrow? Um, because we kind of saw that play out last year, where in the Big Ten tournament against Ohio State, like, they were awful, and
Yeah.
AJ was a
Oh,
big
I
part of
was
that.
at
Like,
that game. It was terrible. Yeah.
they were just terrible. But then that first weekend of the tournament, we saw the potential that team had when they beat that USC team was tough as nails, and
Yep.
they handled them, and then they beat a pretty doggone good Marquette team in that second round.
Yeah.
That was better than the Kansas State team that eventually knocked Michigan State out easily.
Yeah.
But they just, when they went to that third round, I think they'd sort of, I don't think they got that adrenaline dump that, like, we made it to the Sweet 16, like, we did it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, you just never know the
Yeah.
psychology of 18 to 22-year-olds. You just don't know.
Right.
But maybe if it's, if this is really the end, for AJ, if he's facing, elimination for the last time, will that be enough to keep the team cranked up to that level that they need to be, level of focus for, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games in March? I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows?
That's a
It
very
could
good.
happen.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that is something good to think about. I haven't considered. I guess that this could be his last, which probably will be his last. That's a good point, Paul.
Mhm.
Something to watch for. Anything else about? I know we've kind of gone back and forth with the games that we're talking about, but anything else to kind of wrap out Wisconsin before we move to Michigan?
No, I think one thing that was noted several places, of course, is that game was fairly close
Hmm.
early, and then Malik Hall, he did. It was kind of indicative of the whole game is that he picked up a bad foul with like 8 minutes left in the first half, and if I remember, he picked up that foul because he failed to box somebody out, and then they got the rebound and he fouled him on the putback.
Yeah.
So that was kind of indicative of most or all of the problems that this team has had
Right.
of just you make kind of a lazy play, and frankly, I saw him do that last night too against Michigan.
Mm.
So um, that's got to get fixed. But then once he went out, the team really struggled with rotations, and they got behind, and they honest, I mean, when they got behind by 10, they never really got any closer than
Yeah.
that. One thing we did notice that will be interesting to see how much of this happens going forward is I think really in that Wisconsin game for the first time we saw kind of the twin tower lineup where Izzo would play
Hmm.
Kohler, I believe, at the four, at the power forward position, and either Sissoko or Cooper at the center. Um, and of course, Wisconsin's a pretty tall, big team, and so that makes sense. He did that sparingly last night against Michigan, but really only for it'd be for like one or two possessions, and then they would shuttle somebody else in. Um, I don't know if we can really say that it wasn't like terribly impressive. I don't know if it was a abject failure either, but
Yeah.
it was interesting to see him go with that sort of big lineup. And Kohler could be a wild card for this team coming down the stretch because he does provide some post offense this team needs. I still don't know if his defense is quite up to snuff, but I feel like we saw him moving his feet a little bit in both of those games. I think Wisconsin, he
Yeah.
had his season high. I think he put up 6 if I remember correctly. So
Yeah.
that's encouraging, guardedly encouraged by that development. And another month, you know,
Yeah.
could have something.
Definitely. I wish that I could go to like an alternate universe and see him had he not gotten hurt, how
Yeah.
he would be playing this season. Obviously, we can't do that, but I think that's an important piece to him going forward because he just needs time to catch up to the rest of the
Yeah.
guys. Let's move on to Michigan. Different outcome at the Breslin
Mm-hmm.
Center last night, 81-62. Izzo got his 700th win on his 69th birthday. Jaden Akins had a career high, and AJ Hogard scored his 1,000th career point. So lots going on, lots
Mm-hmm.
of stats being raised, and I just thought, although the first half made me scared. I just thought that they just had a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and maybe it truly was that 700, like you said, like AJ said, that 700th win was on the line. But I just felt like it was a very different team than what I watched at the Kohl Center. They just wanted it more. And I don't know this stat, and I don't know if you know this, Paul, but have they been able to dig themselves out of a deficit like that in any other game this season?
Oh boy, I'd have to go back and check. I
I
know
know.
that they
I should
were
have.
they were down by 9 early.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like they've almost come back, and like I believe that, like for example, against Arizona, I think they were down by quite a bit, and they wound up taking the lead, but they
Hmm.
wound up then giving that lead back. So I don't
Yeah.
think that really necessarily counts. As far as wins goes, I'd have to go back. I don't
Yeah.
recall them coming back to win after being down that much, but that doesn't
I don't either, and
necessarily mean
so
it.
it doesn't truly matter, I guess, at this point. But I just felt like it was a different. They showed some different signs in this game, being able to pull themselves out of that deficit, and then keep the lead for the rest of the time. There was not very much back and forth after they gained the lead. There was
No.
kind of no looking back, which is something that I really liked, and something that I hope that they could keep up going forward, because that's something that they've had trouble with, like you said, in the Arizona game, getting that lead but then losing it. I've noticed that. A couple more stats. The Spartans were still out rebounded by Michigan.
Yes.
Um, Michigan State had 9 offensive rebounds and 17 defensive rebounds, and Michigan had 13 offensive and 21 defensive. So, not so great again. But they shot pretty well, 55.7%. Uh, I mean, good game, good win over Michigan as always. Uh, Anything that you saw from this game that one needs to carry over, or two you think needs to stop and should be fixed? Like you mentioned Malik
Yeah,
Hall a little bit, but in those two categories, kind of give me a couple points.
yeah, I think so. Well, the other point I'll make is that I think going into the game, and I actually said this to Brendan. He didn't agree with me, but I said it's either going to be an excruciating nail biter the whole way, or Michigan State's going to blow them out.
Yeah.
And we sort of got both, honestly, right? Because the first half was that
Right.
excruciating nail biter, and the reason I would say, I mean, yeah, the rebound. And one of the punchlines is rebounding continues to be a problem. It was a
Yeah.
problem against Michigan, and Michigan's not a good rebounding team. So what's going on, guys?
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, honestly, in that first half, the thing that made me a little bit nervous coming in is that if you look at some of the stats, Michigan's actually, from just a pure shooting standpoint, they're not bad. They're one of the better shooting teams in the Big Ten. The other team in that category is Minnesota, interestingly enough. Minnesota and Michigan have some interesting parallels, and I think the Spartans draw the Gophers pretty soon, too, so that'll be
Yeah.
interesting to watch for. But they're not bad shooting from the field, and we saw that in the first half. I mean, they just lit us up. I mean, they were shooting like, 70% or something crazy like that for large stretches of that first half. And so that's how they got that lead. And I mean, just sitting there, it was like, huh, what's happening? And honestly, the fact that Michigan State got back within 2 points at halftime was kind of a miracle because of how well Michigan was shooting and the fact that they were rebounding so well. I mean, the sort of scary thing is if you actually look at the offensive rebounding rate, MSU did worse against Michigan than they did against Wisconsin. Even it's like 43% to 41% of their missed shots they got. So again, if the team's rebounding all their misses and they're making most of them anyway, that makes it really hard to keep up. But the good news was MSU actually shot the ball really well last night, and so that was able to offset that problem in rebounding. And then Michigan cooled off in the second half, clearly. The other advantage that MSU had last night is the turnovers were very strongly in MSU's favor because MSU took care of the ball and then they turned Michigan over, which is something that Michigan has had a problem with this year. So that helped to disguise some of the rebounding problems, quite honestly. Um, but yeah, and I think the as far as the second half goes, I think Michigan expended a lot of energy in that first half. And then, in the second half, once the dam kind of broke, you can sort of tell a team that's a little bit frazzled. And I mean, this team's 2-8 right now. They're having a rough season. And I think that's just tough. You're on the road in a rivalry game. Things start to snowball, and it just snowballed on them. And MSU played, very well in the second half. The what Izzo would call effort related things, like rebounds or going for loose balls, much better in the second half. They defended much better, and that contributed to Michigan shooting much worse. And then I think MSU finally started hitting open shots because, as I mentioned, and that I felt like the first 5-10 minutes of that game, MSU would get shots and there'd be nobody within, it'd be like no one anywhere close to the Michigan State shooter, and they would still brick it. And then of course Jaden Akins though was not bricking anything. He was like 7 for 10, I think, from three. So that's pretty good. If you hit 70% of your threes on high volume, yeah, you're going to probably win most times if you got a guy that's going to do that. Which was good because Walker again didn't shoot well. So that kind of offset those two different problems. But so yeah, the shooting was better. That's always good. But yeah, the rebounding, it's still a problem. And again, is this going to get better? I mean, the reason that you can be optimistic is that when MSU has played teams that are actually good rebounding teams, and Baylor and Illinois are two examples, they were able to rebound. So it's like you can do it. I mean, that's the thing that's frustrating about this team is that people complain. Fans want to complain about this team, and that's fine, about them underachieving. And yeah, you could say that this team has underachieved so far, but it's not like we haven't seen flashes of this team's potential, whereas we only need to see them do things we've already seen them do. Like, we're not expecting Jackson Kohler to, be like 15-10 guy off the bench suddenly out of nowhere. Like, the team doesn't need that. They just need everybody to kind of, like, people want to complain about the center position. And yeah, Sissoko and Cooper, they've had some rough goes. And like when they try to tinker with post offense, it doesn't look good. And sometimes the post defense doesn't look good. But I feel like we've seen these guys do it. So I think they have it in them. Like Cooper in the Marquette game last year was great. So we just need that again. We just need to see that again. And like it's a sophomore slump. I don't know. Sissoko's had some personal issues. Um, so I think the potential's still there if they play like they did in the second half against Michigan. But one also thing that was talked about in the press conference is this team is having trouble putting two good halves together in a row. If we go back to the Maryland game, they played great in that first half, came out in the second half and were basically objectively terrible, but they just sort of hung on for the win. So you need to put two good halves in a row, other than against Baylor. Although, it was nice to beat Baylor. I enjoyed that. So again, there's potential there, but there's still screws that are loose, and it's a few hours. It'll be February, so it's time to tighten the screws.
Yeah, that's something that I wrote on our little outline here. The Spartans are capable of playing great basketball, and that's, I think, the most frustrating part of all of this. Like you've said, we've seen every single one of those players on that team have fabulous games. Have a Jaden Akins type game like he had last night, and they just haven't been able to hold on to it. And I don't really know how you make that stick. I'm not a basketball coach, and I'm not really sure how that's done, but it just seems like it keeps coming and then slipping out of their hands over and over, and I don't like that this late in the season. So I'll be curious to know what happens. Something that I thought, just an additional point about Michigan, and I was trying to look this up, but I couldn't find it. A bunch of people commented on how long Michigan's I think he's a guard, Jalen Llewellyn,
Mm, I think
had
that's
to
right.
play last night. And I couldn't find the minutes. I tried to just do a quick Google search, but I couldn't find it. But
35 minutes,
that's a long time. That's a long time.
most of the game.
Yeah. Um, but it just brought up something, and we're going to go on a little bit of a tangent here for a second. But
Okay.
so, the Doug McDaniel, he can't travel with the team, barely is playing at all. It seems like it's an academic, situation.
That is the rumor.
I just, if that is the case, obviously it's speculation, but I just don't understand how one of your best, highest athletes on your basketball team at a Big Ten school could ever slip through the cracks academically and get to the point where they would need to be suspended like that. And I think that just kind of speaks to the state of Michigan's program right now. Obviously, we don't know, and I haven't been following their season 2 seriously, but it just seems like things are going quite haywire over there, and I'll be curious to know if Jawan sticks around for next season. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's a bold take or not, but it just seems like things are going bad, and I
Yeah.
don't think
It's
he'll stick around.
it's not going well. No, if I've heard some other commentary on this too, and it's if I'm a betting man, I'm saying he's not coming back next
Yeah,
year. I mean, and I think you're right. The wheels are kind of coming off the bus in Ann Arbor a little bit because, as you say, in this modern time, with the amount of resources that athletic programs have to devote to athletics, and in most places, basketball is important. Although
right.
it's been speculated that in Ann Arbor, football comes first, second, and third, and basketball is kind of a distant fourth or fifth or sixth, depending on what day of the week it is. How good the hockey team is, I don't know. Um, and I think we've seen that, like the John Beeline experience at Michigan. I mean, some have speculated that he left somewhat under the cover of darkness after the 19 tournament because he was sick of Jim Harbaugh getting all the
Yeah,
being sort of the golden boy when he actually had the most competitive high profile program, and I don't
yeah,
blame him. Beeline's a good coach. He deserves better than that, frankly.
yeah.
So that's kind of just indicative of how that athletic program operates. But as you say, to have a player that's like your star basketball player, like probably your most important player, like
Right.
slip through the cracks academically, like that's just unacceptable. Like there's
No.
so many advisors and
Right.
other people that should be keeping track of this. And like, I mean, and I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there that are like, well, those courses at U of M are so hard. They're not. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If you show up and you go to your tutoring session and you
Right.
do your homework, you're probably going to pass. You're probably going to stay eligible.
Right.
And I know these guys are not all Rhodes Scholars, and that's fine. Getting an education is important, but like, yeah, you got to be making some bad choices for this to happen. It's as
Right.
simple as that.
Right. Just making some bad choices and nobody paying attention, which
Yeah,
seems crazy to me. But oh well.
I
I
don't know.
mean, they'll figure it out over there or they won't, and we don't need to talk about it again on this
Yep.
podcast.
Yep.
But it's just something that came to mind as the game was kind of winding down of I just wonder how that ever even happens. Because I can't imagine that ever happening, to a Tyson Walker or, anyone connected to our program, I guess. But just something that made me kind of chuckle a little bit.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
unfortunate
there.
for them, obviously, the guys that, you want guys that come to play in the Big Ten to do well. Because
Yeah.
I'm a, Big Ten fan in general, but kind of sucks for them.
Yeah.
Hopefully they can figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a bizarre situation. It
Yeah.
just really, there's no other way to explain it.
Yeah. Yep. Anything else that you want to say about Michigan before we kind of go ahead into kind of overall season outlook?
I think we've covered Michigan pretty
I think so too.
thoroughly. Other than, boy, it's really good to beat them in something again. That's
Yes,
nice.
yes, it
That
is.
feels good
I
for
wore
everybody.
my Beat Michigan pin to work yesterday, so I did my part, and
Good
it,
job.
it helped. So I'll have to keep that close to me.
I somewhat accidentally wrote wore all blue all day, including to the game. But I mean,
And is that a blue sweater?
it's it's bluish gray, I would say.
Okay, okay. Ooh.
I'm also slightly colorblind, so I don't know.
That's funny. All of the away games that I've gone to, I've been very cautious because I've been to, well, all red, Wisconsin,
Hmm.
Indiana, Ohio State. I've been very cautious, no red on in my outfits at all because I didn't want to get, confused for
Yeah,
on, working on any of those beats. But you need to work on that, Paul. You need to have someone help you make
yeah.
sure.
I was intending to wear a more appropriate T-shirt under it all, but I even forgot to do that. So I felt I was for a minute there, like in the first half, I'm like if this is my fault, I'm never gonna live this down. That's gonna be
Yeah.
terrible.
Well, I painted my nails blue for the Lions, and then I really tried to be very serious about not having any blue on me when we play Michigan. And I was like,
Mm.
I need to go take my nail polish off right now. But I mean, it's not
It's not the
near
same
their color
shade
at
of blue.
all.
Yeah,
But it didn't help the Lions either. So I was nervous that
no,
the curse had carried over. So it was neither one of our faults.
no, that's good.
And it
That
didn't
feels
matter in
good.
the end, anyways.
Nope.
Okay. Do you have any specific points as far as season outlook goes from
Sure.
any of your data that you want to go through?
Yeah, so I've been as the season goes on here, I've been trying to update some of the the simulation results that kind of will project where Michigan State goes from here. And after MSU had gone on the road and beaten Maryland and had that Wisconsin game looming, there was that chance that MSU could kind of slip into that upper echelon and maybe compete for the Big Ten title if things broke well. And there were some paths for that, but the odds were pretty small. After losing to Wisconsin, we can now say with pretty high level of confidence that Michigan State is no longer a legitimate candidate to win the Big Ten title with 5 losses. They would need to run the table and pray, and the numbers that I give are less than 1%. It's like 1 in 330 or something like that is what the specific odds would be. So we can put that to bed for Big Ten title. So now it becomes a matter of kind of positioning yourself for Big Ten tournament seeding and or NCAA seeding. And the way that's looking now, MSU is still projected to win somewhere between 11 and 12 games, with it shading towards the 12 side. And that is mostly due to the fact that the schedule going forward is a little bit easier than the schedule that they've already played. And so even though they're 5-5, according to the most recent estimate, MSU has already played 5 of the 8 toughest games on the schedule. And so, that's a good thing. So obviously there's the road game at Purdue. That's the toughest game. That's probably a loss. That's probably a loss most years. No shame in that.
I
But
would
then other
like to
than that,
interrupt really quick and let
oh,
you know
yep.
that right now, as we're recording this, Northwestern went on the road to play at Purdue tonight, January 31st, and they are currently winning 73-71 at Purdue. So, you know,
Could
I
happen.
don't want to compare us too much to Northwestern because obviously Boo Booey smacked us in the face, but it seems like it's a doable thing to win. It's Mackey, right? Mackey Arena.
It is Mackey
Um,
Arena, yes.
Yeah. So I'll update you if, they only have 3 minutes left in the second half. So at the end of this episode, if they've finished the game, we can discuss that.
Oh, I
Continue. I didn't
was.
mean to interrupt too
It,
much, but I just
it's
wanted to throw that in there.
it's okay, Sydney. I also had that tab up on my browser somewhere, and I was periodically checking it because that game actually is interesting for a few reasons. Um, but other than that game at Mackey, I mean, obviously there's the home game coming up against Illinois. Um, now, Illinois had the one player that was suspended who has now been reinstated, so that changes the dynamics there. But I mean, Illinois still, I think, picked up a loss recently, maybe to Northwestern. I'd have to go back and check. They did lose to somebody recently, but they're not certainly unbeatable in their current with their current roster, especially in the Breslin. That's going to be the next toughest game. And then actually, other than that, the hardest game is the road game at Minnesota, which comes up in a few. It's like 2 games from now, and that one's actually just the ninth hardest game in the schedule. So the other 7 games are all the bottom half of difficulty. And right now, if you look at projected point spreads using something like Ken Palm, MSU looks to be favored in, I believe, the next 7 games. So will they win all 7? Probably not. But if they can go 6-1, maybe 5-2, that's still okay. And I think that's pretty manageable. And one way to look at this right now, and Michigan State's 5-5. So for every road game they win, they can pick up a game over 500. It's kind of obvious, but it is kind of a good thing to keep in mind. If they lose a home game, then you sort of drop below 500. So that's kind of how you play it. So they beat Minnesota on the road, then they can kind of, you're already kind of in that sort of 11-9 range, and a couple more very winnable road games like at Penn State, at Michigan. Of course, at Michigan's always going to be tough, and at Indiana are the other remaining road games. Those are all very winnable. So clearly there's the opportunity for MSU to go on a run, to position themselves to, get to that sort of 12 or maybe 13 win record at the end of the regular season. That's kind of where the math set is most likely. That would require finishing what would be 7-3 or maybe even 8-2 would be to get to 13 wins. So that's kind of the optimistic view. 11-9 is also, if they are not lucky, and I think I discussed luck on this podcast a little bit, which is a real thing. They've been a little unlucky so far, which is not winning those toss-ups. If they continue to be unlucky, then 11-9 and 10 or 10-10 becomes more in play. And then things start to get a little, then the knuckles get a little white as you go down the stretch. I don't think that'll happen. I think it's more likely that they're going to go on a little bit of a run here and get above that 500 watermark over the next few weeks, because there are a lot of winnable games. Now, there's a couple things that concern me. One of which is there's this concept which it's been talked about on the message boards, and then I've actually written about it. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's referred to as the Tom Izzo Bermuda Triangle. This is familiar. Yes, I'm getting a nod.
Yes, yes.
So this is actually on the old Rivals board, a poster. I used to discuss this. His name was Carl N. Pulled this data that showed that basically at the end of January and early February, Tom Izzo teams always underachieve, or maybe not always, but like disproportionately, they do poorly during that stretch. And so, the Michigan game made me a little nervous for that reason. I would say the next 2 games, the home game at Maryland this weekend and the road game at Minnesota, I've got a little bit circled for that reason, because that would be the type of game that, might fall into this Bermuda Triangle. But if MSU can survive those 2, then I'm feeling better, because then you're sort of out of that sort of funky zone where weird things seem to happen. Because the problem is that, MSU has very few chances to pick up quality wins going down the stretch. That home game against Illinois is probably your best bet. And, for NCAA tournament seeding reasons, you want to pick up that win, because you want to have one more quad one win. That would be a nice feather in the cap. You're pretty much going to feel really good on Selection Sunday if you get that win. If you're sitting at 12-13 conference wins, now you're talking, 6, 7 seed, something like that. I don't know. It's a little too early to talk about that, but that's kind of the range where you can get. But if you don't beat Illinois, I think some numbers I looked up is that there's a good chance that MSU could go 0-7 against the top 5 teams in the conference. And they'd have a shot at Northwestern coming up later, but that doesn't look good on the resume. So it would be best to avoid that. But But yeah, the next few weeks, there's a lot of potential wins. They should get wins. But the problem is that there's also the potential for bad losses, and bad losses can cause problems.
And this team particularly makes me nervous that that is something that's more on the table,
Yeah,
uh, just because of their inconsistencies.
exactly. But I mean, the good news is MSU hasn't really picked up any bad losses so far, other than you could argue the James Madison game to open the season. But an overtime loss where you shoot like 5% from three and you lose in overtime in like November 18th, like I know the committee is not supposed to take into account timing, like that's not supposed to matter, but like, come on.
Yeah.
Like I would, I can't get overly worked up about that. Um, but as far as right now, as far as the standings go, why Northwestern is interesting is that previously, before the maybe a week or so ago, MSU was very clearly slotted in as around finishing like fourth in the conference. That's where it looked like they were going to be. That 4 seed in the Big Ten tournament looked most likely. But Northwestern and to some extent Nebraska have made things a little bit more interesting, such that now, according to my math, Northwestern has actually passed MSU in the standings for expected wins. So they're both now projected to finish in that 12-8 range. And if the Wildcats hang on in West Lafayette, and
Yeah.
it's now tied with a minute and
Tied
a half
right now.
left,
Yeah.
then that even gives them an extra edge. Like if Northwestern upsets Purdue, they will very clearly be ahead of MSU in that sort of pecking order. So, and that has to do with both expected wins and also Big Ten tournament seeding. Um, Obviously, MSU is 0-1 so far against Northwestern. They have a chance to tie them up later in the season. It's the second to last game of the season. Northwestern comes to Breslin, and Boo Buie has never had a record-setting day at Breslin, so that should be fine, right?
Yeah.
Um, but either way, even if they split, like the fact that Northwestern already has a win against Purdue and might beat them tonight, that's going to make it almost impossible to win the tiebreaker. So, you know, that fourth seed is very much in play right now, and MSU looks like they might be on the outside looking in. So, that double bye is looking a little tenuous right now. And Nebraska was looking like they could be a threat too. They wound up losing a road game here a few days ago that knocked them back a little bit um, to Maryland actually. But other than that, MSU is again they're in that sort of fifth places range with Nebraska possibly looming in sixth and Northwestern now ahead of them. And of course, that's not the actual Big Ten standing. That's the projected standings at the end of the year. If all of the, if each team plays to their average level of ability for the rest of the year and, all the coin flips are even basically. So still a lot to happen, still a lot to play for, but that's the kind of where they're projected right now.
I feel like the Big Ten tournament is where Minneapolis this year, right? I think
I'd have
so.
to
I
check. I
think so.
think it is. Yeah, that sounds
I
right.
remember thinking, oh, different place. Um, I hope I'm going to put this out into the universe. I hope by the time the Big Ten tournament has come around that the Spartans have been able to find some consistency and that they could. I mean, I'm okay with finishing fifth in the Big Ten, because that will mean that they have been able to put together some good wins at the end of the season, and the Big Ten tournament, I like the Big Ten tournament, and winning the Big Ten tournament is fabulous, but it doesn't matter to me as much as these games at the end of the season and kind of getting themselves ready more for March Madness. Maybe I'm crazy for feeling that way. I don't know how you feel, but I like watching the Big Ten tournament because it's the last time to watch all the teams, obviously play each other, guaranteed, but I just doesn't matter to me as much. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm enough of a sort of old school Big Ten fan that the Big Ten tournament, that the Big Ten tournament existed after I graduated, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like a bit of a novelty now. I will say, and others have mentioned this as well, that um, in the last 10 years or so, the Big Ten tournament has taken on a little bit more of an important role, and I've been more interested in it and excited about it. And a big reason for that, others have pointed this out, and I think it's true, is that in 2012, Michigan State and Ohio State were both very good. They were both like vying for like number one seeds, and I think they split in the regular season. I believe that Ohio State came to Breslin and upset Michigan State the last game of the season. And the Big Ten tournament that year was very much seen as the rubber match between those two schools who were both very, very good. That was like the peak of Thad Matta's career at Ohio State. And I believe MSU won the Big Ten tournament that year and actually got the number one seed. They wound up flaming out in the Sweet 16 because Brandon Dawson got injured in that last regular season game, and they just were dog tired by the time they got blown out by Louisville, I believe, and they had to go out west. They had some weird travel, and that was Draymond's senior year, so that ended kind of a little bit flat. But that was the last time MSU had a one seed, and so that for me sort of legitimized the Big Ten tournament a bit. It sort of showed its value that this can be kind of a rubber match for. If you need one more crack at a team and you think you're really better than them, then that's kind of your chance to prove it on a neutral court. So,
And maybe my opinion about that is just solely based in last year when they had a terrible game against Ohio State, and I just was like, this doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything. And so maybe that's why I feel that way.
yeah,
But there is value to it. And I don't want to say that,
yeah.
too much. But
Maybe
I'm
another
more
positive spin on that is that if it goes poorly, it doesn't matter, but it's a good
right.
chance to pick up some wins and make you feel good going into the
That's
tournament.
a good point. That's a good way to put it. If it goes poorly, then you get a little bit more time to rest and practice
Mm-hmm,
up. But if it goes well, well then great, it went well.
mm-hmm.
That's a good point. That's a good outlook,
I'm
Paul.
gonna
I
look at
should
it
I
that
should
way.
hold on to that.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Anything else as far as season outlook that you want to run through?
I'll just say a couple things about the NCAA tournament. I think it's never too early to look at that. I think I've mentioned this before, but I really like bracketology, but I feel bracketology is useless until roughly just about now. So I honestly haven't looked at it closely. I'll probably start putting together some numbers on that this weekend to try to get a feel for it. I will say that MSU's current metrics still continue to be very good. We're at top 20 in not top 20 in the net. I think top 25. I haven't checked actually after the Michigan game. I think number 17 in Ken Palm, and even higher than that in some of the other predictive metrics like Torvik. And so MSU is very safe as far as NCAA tournament goes right now. Um, again, if they pick up a couple bad losses in the next month, those metrics start to go down. Things start to get a little more dicey. But I'd say right now they're in pretty good shape. And I'm the seed that I'm kind of looking at right now as maybe I want to say dream scenario, but it's going to be tough to really pick up if MSU really were to go on a run, could they even get up to like a 3 or a 4 seed, like a best case scenario, like if they were to win out, like who knows? But I mean, more likely, I think, I think a 6 seed is a nice sweet spot. And I don't remember if we've discussed this before, but if they could get to something in that realm, and you'd like to see them higher, of course, but 6 seed's not a bad place to be because you're lined up against if you can beat the 11 seed, you're lined up with a 3 seed. I don't know if any of the potential 3 seeds really scare me right now. And you're still on the opposite side of the bracket from the 1 seed, so it's a pretty good place to be, if you're in the position that Michigan State is now. So that's kind of where I'm thinking they might be. If they are the 6 seed, I think there's a chance they could wind up in Detroit because they would be the opposite side. I mean, right now you got to assume almost certainly that Purdue is going to wind up as that 1 seed, unless, of course, they do something like lose to Northwestern and they're down a point with 15 seconds. But it's funny, we're recounting something in real time that everyone will know how it ended up
I
when
know.
they listen to this, but that's fine. Um,
Yeah,
so
earlier I almost said, well, I don't want to spoil it, and then I was like, this is going to go out tomorrow, and it'll
it's
already be
actually
spoiled, so it doesn't matter.
it's actually the opposite of that. So so there's some interesting things that could happen if MSU can wind up as that 6 seed. But then beyond that, and I saw some graphics that people were coming up there, and I think I may have mentioned this before as well, that there are certain offensive and defensive metrics that have defined each of the national champions over the last going back to the late 90s when some of these numbers started to be tabulated. And MSU is still on that borderline of teams that are potential NCAA national champion caliber. And there's only, right now, there are only, at least the way I count them, there's only 13 teams in that category. So that's a pretty select group. Now, there's like a core group that's like closer to the average, and then MSU is like more than one standard deviation away from that, so maybe less likely. But I mean, as far as those teams with like those core metrics, I only count 5, honestly, and it's Auburn, Houston, North Carolina, Purdue, and Tennessee. Um, if I run through that list, I mean, I guess North Carolina's got the historical cachet, but like, do I believe that Auburn, Houston, Purdue, or Tennessee is going to win the national title? I do not. So that tells me this could be another kind of wide open tournament, much like it was last year. Um, Incidentally, UConn, who I believe is number 1 in the nation, is not among that list of teams that is, potentially has the right metrics. I think their defense is not currently up to
That's
snuff. If
very
I'm looking at
interesting.
that, yeah. So that does tell you things. And Illinois and Wisconsin are also not in that list currently, but there's a lot of teams that are very borderline that could, slip up or slip down. And MSU is actually right on that border too. They've kind of drifted in and out of that zone of where I would consider them a realistic national title contender. So I know some people won't want to hear that because they think that, oh no, we're terrible. They're only 13-8, but these predictive metrics, they tell you something. That's probability is not destiny, but they tell you something, and so they're worth paying attention to.
Yeah, if you're the type of person that doesn't want to hear that, then you probably shouldn't be listening to this podcast, because from this point forward, it's national championship or bust for me. So,
Right on.
if you're one of those people, you and I just won't agree. But that's positive, and I think that's something good to keep in perspective, because so many people have been like outraged at how this season has gone, and like there are some things that I think you could be a little bit mad about, like those effort related things that we talked about earlier. But I just think looking at things big picture and looking at the rest of the schedule going forward is an important piece to how you should react to things so far, because that puts things into major perspective for the most important part, which is March. That's coming up very soon,
Mm-hmm.
which is very exciting. Anything else that you want to talk about as far as March Madness? I feel
No,
like
I
we've
think
covered a lot of good stuff, Paul.
I think so too. Yeah, it's always fun to catch up, Sydney. And looks
Yes.
like we got overtime in West Lafayette, is what
I know, I saw
the
that.
internet is telling me.
Well, you know what? We'll end this episode, and then you and I will go rush to the TV and watch the rest.
Okay, that sounds like a good plan.
Okay, Paul, thank you so much for joining. It was a
Thank you, Sydney.
pleasure, as always. It's awesome to have you on. Um, Follow the podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and check us out on YouTube to see our beautiful faces for our episodes. um, Definitely check out Spartans Illustrated. We're doing great stuff over there for basketball season, behind the scenes stuff. Our leader David Harns puts out great behind the scenes articles that really kind of give you the background look into things going on at Michigan State. And I'll have Paul's socials linked below, so give him a follow, because as March Madness kind of kicks up, he will be putting out some great kind of analysis, different articles through Spartans Illustrated talking about March Madness, which is very exciting. Thanks so much for listening, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I said that. You should watch us on YouTube, but you should also subscribe. And I'm going to stop talking now, because I guess today is just a word vomit day for me, but that's okay. Okay.
Subscribe twice.
Yeah, do it right now. Okay, bye.
Bye, everybody.